The emotional boundary says, like, my work isn't me. My work is my work, and I'm me, and it lives separately from me. If the work has to be your child, it is a grown child. It is a child that has finished high school, that graduated college. It went out and it got a job, and it's doing its job out in the world. So letting people think and feel and assume whatever they want, giving yourself the gift of being misunderstood.
Welcome to the Real Estate and Financial Independence Podcast. My name is Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach. I'm your host for the show, which is all about investing in real estate, achieving financial independence, and ultimately doing more of what matters. Whether you're a first-time listener or a long-time listener, thank you for being here today. The topic of today's episode is Fire the Haters, Finding Courage to Create in a Critical World. This is an interview with my good friend, Jillian Johnsrud, who just wrote a book by the same title. And we talk all about criticism, both criticism from the outside, maybe putting yourself out on the internet and Facebook groups or wherever and getting trolls and kind of haters in that respect. That's something that people are very aware of today. But also criticism from family members, from people you know, from your customers. I know as a real estate investor, when I first started, I was terrified of some of the results of criticism that I got. I was sending letters out to people who would call and be angry that I sent them a letter to buy their house. Or a real estate agent who criticized me for making an offer that was less than what they thought the property was worth. Or other types of criticism, even from family members who mean well or maybe don't mean well. And those kinds of things can derail you, both the external criticism and also that worst critic we have, our inner critic. So Jillian and I explore that topic. We talk about some stories from her career as an entrepreneur, as a real estate investor. She and her husband, Adam, have bought properties themselves and built up enough income and other investments as well to be able to take many retirements. That's something she's known for. She and her husband have traveled around the world. They have 5 kids and they live in Montana. And she writes about her experiences of achieving financial independence, but also of dealing with the internal battle that we have as entrepreneurs, as creatives, as people doing things that matter in your life. So she's one of the wisest people I know and really think you're going to enjoy this discussion about criticism and firing the haters. Before we get to the main interview, I want to continue a segment I'm doing each and every week now on the podcast where I share a story from my real estate investing business that you might find interesting. So a behind the scenes story. And this week, the behind the scenes story is all about water. I've experienced several water problems this year that have been very costly and cost a lot of money to fix, to remedy, to clean up some mold issues in some cases. And so I want to give one particular situation. We just recently had a leak that appeared to be a roof leak. So a tenant reported that. And so part of the issue is identifying where potential places in your properties water can get in. And I'm going to give you 4 different places we've dealt with. One is this situation where we had a roof leak. Another can be gutters. So if you are in an area that has a lot of water flow, which we are working in the northwestern part of South Carolina, it's actually considered almost a rainforest in parts of the foothills near us. So lots and lots of rain. And so gutters and distributing the water somewhere when it comes off the roof, where does that water go? And then keeping those gutters clean if you do have gutters, because having full gutters with leaves or pine straw really doesn't do any good. But by having gutters, you can distribute the water away from the foundation. This is where a lot of the problems happen, that if you get water that runs into the ground, but then runs down the foundation of your property into the crawl space or into a basement, if you have a basement, that can be a big issue. So checking your roof, checking your gutters, then also checking the flow of water around your properties. So we have some properties in the past where they're built on a hill. This is actually a very negative thing. If you can avoid having a property that's on the side of a hill, where water runs down the hill towards your property, it's very difficult to solve that water problem. And we have one property in particular that is on the side of a hill, and it's such a good location and other things we liked about it. We're kind of dealing with the problem, but we actually had to dig what's called a big French drain, a trench essentially several feet down to get to the footings below where the foundation is. And then we put gravel, we put pipes that would collect the water, and then we put this thick membrane that water can't get through against the foundation. And then that has to be maintained over time. It can fail, it can get little places where it pulls back. So those are the types of solutions sometimes you have to do if the water is running towards your foundation, towards your basement. An ideal situation would be sitting up a little bit higher on the top of a hill, and then the water runs away from the property. So if you have a roof that works, you have gutters, and you have this distribution of water around from the ground level of your property that works, then the only other place you can get leaks typically is then plumbing. And we've had some of those this year too. And so what's the lesson? This story we've had, the process that I have in my business, I have a property manager these days. They get a call from a tenant reporting, hey, there looks like there's some water stain on the roof. And then they send a maintenance tech out there, kind of check the humidity, where's there seem to be water. And they identify it, they go in the attic and say, okay, there's a place where it's leaking on the roof. So that's a very simple scenario, actually, one of the easier ones to fix. My property manager just threw a text message, say, can we call a roofing person out to go check this out and try to solve the problem? And so they're either going to have to replace one part of the roof, or if it's an old enough roof, we might end up having to replace the entire roof if the shingles are failing or something's not working there. So that is a roof scenario. Other times we've had problems with gutters, need to install gutters or just keeping our gutters clean. That can be a preventative maintenance type thing. Just having a schedule on your Google Calendar or some kind of spreadsheet saying we need to go clean gutters in our rental property this often, especially in the fall when leaves are falling. And then even more than that, some of the bigger problems are these groundwater movement, making sure if you do need French drains, if you do need to get a person with a bobcat or kind of some kind of little tractor out there to build up the ground so that the water doesn't go towards your foundations. These are very detailed things, of course, but my message here is that some of these maintenance problems can be very costly if you don't stay on top of them, both from a kind of short-term reactive standpoint, respond to it quickly before it becomes a big problem, but also walk your properties, look at them, make sure, see if there's ways you can prevent larger, more expensive problems by being proactive and solving the water problem ahead of time. All right, maybe more than you wanted to hear behind the scenes about water. I'm sure I'll have other conversations and stories about that in the future. Now let's get started with today's interview with Jillian Johnsrud. Hey, Jillian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, or having me back, I guess.
Yeah, this is it. This is a long time coming because I've known you've written this book for a while, and we're in a mastermind group together and just friends and have discussed the fact that you're putting this book out to the world. But I just want to say up front, this was excellent. I don't say that about every book. I read a lot of books, but I knew you would do this. But this is a book, Fire the Haters, that I needed to read. I needed to hear so many of the messages in this book, and I know everybody listening to this is going to get so much value out of it. So I just want to say thank you. I know there's a lot of work to put a book out into the world.
Oh, thank you. It is a long process, yeah. But I'm really happy with how it came together.
Yeah. Well, so the title is Fire the Haters, Finding Courage to Create Online in a Critical World. And as I read this book, I was just thinking about a lot of my audience and the people who are small entrepreneurs, they're real estate investors, they're people who are aspiring to do some amazing things out in the world. But I think the common theme with all of us is this word courage that you put out there, that we all have these fears about, is this the right time? Am I the right person to do this? And a lot of what this book's speaking to seems to be that, that fear of putting yourself out to the world. At least that's what I interpret it. So I wanted to ask you just kind of the author question, like what was your motivation? Like, do you remember the moment or the motivation that said, I need to write this book? Because usually there's something that kind of motivates you to put it out there.
Yeah, I mean, I love creatives. I love entrepreneurs. I love small businesses, like people who have this amazing vision for their life, and they're doing it. They're getting out there and they're making the thing. But I also know how difficult it is, like with the imposter syndrome, with handling criticism, whether that's in real life from your friends and family or online from strangers. And I just thought, what if we could just like gather up all the collective wisdom into like one little handy guidebook and save everyone like so much stress and sleepless nights and like worry, kind of fast track people to a place where they feel courageous and confident to kind of move forward with this vision they have for their life. Yeah.
So there's a lot of challenges that you outline in the book. I'm just wondering, is there, for entrepreneurs or new creatives, new people who are putting their work out in the world, are there some common pitfalls or obstacles you're seeing that motivated you to say this is needed? Like, is it the fact that people might quit? They need to put that out in the world. I'm just wondering what you saw as like a big challenge or need that a lot of people who should read the book.
Yeah. I mean, I structured it kind of like I would talk to a friend. And because I do a lot of coaching, I've had hundreds and hundreds of conversations with people who want to do something different. And that might be real estate investing. That might be starting an online business. It might also just be like doing a mini retirement, retiring early, like they're doing something slightly outside the norm. And so first, it's kind of like that first fear is, what will people think? Like, what will they say? How can I handle that criticism? And once we kind of put that to bed, it's that internal critic. Well, what if I'm not good enough? Well, there's other people who are better than me. Like, who am I to like start this when there's so many people who are legitimately better than me at this? And that online criticism or that external criticism, really it amplifies our internal critic. It wouldn't be so hard if we didn't have an internal critic. We've hung out in real life. And so you realize I'm very tall. I'm 6 foot. My entire life, I desperately wanted to be 6'2". Like legitimately every night I went to bed as a kid and I prayed to be 6'2". So whenever people criticize me for being too tall, I'm like, whatever, buddy, I am not tall enough. I came in 2 inches too short. Like, it doesn't bother me at all because I don't have that internal criticism for that particular topic. And then the last section is about failure. How do we recover? How do we stay in the game? How do we kind of shift our perspective so we're not playing this really high stakes game of win or lose? And those are kind of the order that I see people naturally flow in conversation.
Yeah. You have this external criticism that triggers or brings up your internal criticism, and then you have the fear of failure or stopping. And so, I want, there's so many good gems that I want to get into and ask you to elaborate on. I thought it might be helpful though. Some people might not have heard our prior interview. Can you think of a story that might be helpful just to tell a little bit more about how you have personally experienced this? Maybe something that you've created or something that you've put out to the world where you dealt with some of the same process with the external critics and then your own internal critic.
Yeah, I opened the book up when I just started. I was maybe a couple months into blogging, and a big curation site offered to publish one of my pieces. And I was so excited. Whenever you get those early wins, like those early breaks, and you think, oh my gosh, it's happening. Like, we're really doing it. It's all coming together. It's kind of like putting your first offer in and you're like, I might buy a house. This is so exciting. I had kind of that early win euphoria. But what I didn't realize was that curation sites, like news outlets, typically, the author doesn't write the title. The managing editor, the senior editor writes a title for your piece and you don't have any say in it. And so they picked a title that was very inflammatory, very shaming. And people read that title and they went straight to the comment section and just let me have it. Like, they were legitimately upset by this very shaming title, which, if you know me, isn't exactly me. Like, inflammatory shaming, not quite my job.
Not in your playbook. I agree.
Not usually. And it was just, I was a mess. Like, I couldn't eat. I wasn't sleeping. Like, I was drinking. I just couldn't. I thought, and this is the thing that a lot of us come into this moment of, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Like, maybe I'm not supposed to be doing this thing. Maybe like this is for other people, but it's not for me because I can't handle this. I can't cope with this. And I emailed one of our mutual friends, Jay Money, and I said, how do you deal with this? Like, I'm a mess. And he just went, oh, sweetie, you never read the comments. And I was like, wait, that's an option? And it was kind of that light bulb moment that people who've gone through this, people who've experienced this, like they have these little set of rules that keeps them in the game, that keeps them working and productive. We put in a lot of offers on a lot of houses when we were buying real estate, and sometimes you don't get it. But it doesn't mean that it was a bad offer. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be doing this. It doesn't mean that like you'll never buy a house. Like it just means, okay. And then we try again.
Yeah, I think this, your particular situation, putting yourself out on a blog, I've been there, and I've had my title changed as well. And I had the same like multi-day experience where I'm just like laying in bed, like I just middle of the day, I'm laying in bed and under the covers, like, oh my God, what's going on here? Real estate investors have very, it might not be putting it out on a blog platform with millions of people, but I remember, I encourage people to do a lot of marketing, off-market marketing. You send letters to people, you send out, offers to realtors that might not be exactly what they wanted on the list price is one thing, and you made a lower offer. So there's all sorts of situations I think our audience is going to relate to, where they put something out there, they make an offer, they send a letter, and somebody is going to criticize them, and they're going to say something either mean-spirited, or they're going to say something that seems very personal. I've had that with sending letters out, like how dare you send a letter to buy my house? And so I guess my question is, whether it's an online, offline context, you did a really good job explaining, this was helpful for me to hear, that there are different types and reasons that people criticize you like that who don't even know you. Maybe you could just unpack a couple of those. I think people, when they actually identify why these things happen, maybe they'll take them less seriously. That's what I learned from it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll add to that, because this is something we definitely have in our area, Facebook groups, because we manage our own rentals. And so we're in Facebook groups where people are like listing a lot of rentals, and the comments, like the laughy faces, the angry faces, like it's, and unfortunately, my husband's like, I just want to list it to where no one criticizes it. And I'm like, honey, I don't know if that's like a realistic expectation. Because those Facebook group comments are brutal. Yep. I tried to create some like characters of who these critics are online. And understanding like their motivation and what causes them to behave this way. Because the reality is, this is kind of who they are. This is their character, and this is what is the outflowing from them to every single thing they touch. And they just happen to bump up against, you on that particular day, but this is kind of their MO. So I did, one of my favorite characters, because I coined it, was the CEO of the internet. Because if you've been online for a minute, like you've met this person, they really think they're in charge. They picked a little corner of the internet and they said, I'm the boss, and everything has to fit my taste, and everything has to match my opinion, and everything has to be exactly how I want it to be. And if it's not, I will yell in all caps, and I will huff and puff, and I will angry face you, and I will, I will be sarcastic, and I'll mock, and I'll shame. And this is, sometimes people ask me, like, what's the difference between a thoughtful critic and a hater? And the difference is, a hater isn't using logic and kind of thoughtful criticism to engage with you. They're weaponizing emotions. So they're taking those emotions like shame or criticism or anger or frustration, and they're using them as a weapon against you to try to get you to alter your behavior. And it's a manipulation, not a conversation. And so whenever I see people online, like in those Facebook groups, in those comments, if they're weaponizing emotions, then it's not something I'm really going to engage in, because they don't have constructive feedback to offer. So they have to weaponize emotions. Yeah.
Is the telltale sign that it's just they're attacking you personally right off the bat? I'm just trying to think back to some of my experiences, both offline and online. And rather than leading with, I think you're better than this. I bet you could do this better. Or it's just like, you're an awful person. You suck, whatever the case might be. And then the specific criticism comes after that.
Sometimes, definitely in the most extreme examples, but whenever I look at even kind of milder cases, a thoughtful criticism might say, for that area, that dollar per square foot, seems a little high. This comparable would suggest, it's maybe closer to that. They actually put thought and information into their comments where how dare you? That's outrageous. Oh. They're weaponizing an emotion. How dare you is weaponizing kind of that fear and that shame. How dare you is weaponizing this fear of being attacked or have done something wrong. That's not actually a thoughtful, helpful comment.
Got it. That does make sense. So once you recognize these, there's all sorts of types of critics. There's going to be your trolls. There's going to be your CEOs of the internet, your haters. So regardless of what they're bringing and what their motivations are, what is a more productive way for those of us who are putting ourselves out there, whether you're marketing your real estate business, whether you're starting a new job, a creative, I remember you mentioned something about boundaries, which I think is one of the biggest ideas of the book that was very helpful for me. How can you create some boundaries between yourself, your own emotional state, and what these criticisms that are flying at you? Because it's going to be natural to have your button pressed. I know it's happened to me. How do you create boundaries around those types of situations?
I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions online is because the advice people will give you is you just need to develop thicker skin. But very tactically, how do we do that? And oftentimes what we think that means is not caring. But caring is part of our humanity, or being willing to be subjected to a lot of attacks or a lot of pain. That's a really bizarre abusive dynamic to say you should just accept more abuse and be okay with it. So I don't think developing thicker skin has anything to do with that. The emotional boundaries are between us and our work. Oftentimes, and it doesn't matter if you're doing creative work or real estate work or entrepreneurship work, we feel so attached to the thing we're doing because we care about it so much. And it's born sometimes out of our blood, sweat, and tears. My real estate I definitely had all three. Blood, sweat, and tears went into those. But sometimes it's born out of our personality and our taste and our expertise and our perspective. And it can feel like an extension of us. And if it's an extension of us, then we should defend it. Then we should protect it. Then we should be upset if people are attacking it, because we should be upset. If someone pokes you with a stick, you should be upset about that. So instead, the emotional boundary says my work isn't me. My work is my work, and I'm me, and it lives separately from me. Sometimes people use the language of the work is it's my baby. This is my baby because we've raised it, we've grown it up. And instead I take that one step further. If the work has to be your child, it is a grown child. It is a child that has finished high school, that graduated college. It went out and it got a job, and it's doing its job out in the world. And just like with our grown children, if they're at their place of employment and someone misunderstands them or someone disagrees with them, we don't run into their office and start defending them and be why are you being mean to my kid? Because that's insane. That's an extreme form of helicopter parenting. Instead, we know it's a grown adult. It can he can handle himself. It'll be okay. He's just doing his job. And I think about our work in the same way. Once you put it out there in the world, it's not a baby anymore. If it's out there, it's a grown adult able to handle it. So if people are attacking your work, having that a boundary that, well, that's not me. And you can. I have a point in the book, kind of marketing versus opinion. You can convince someone to try something, but after they try it, they will have an opinion and they will think and feel and assume whatever they want to. Chad, I could invite you to go to the movies with me and I can convince you to come. But after you see the movie, you will think and feel and assume whatever you want to. Right. And for me to come back and be no, Chad, you don't understand. It was actually really thoughtful. No, Chad, you don't understand. It was funny. This was a great movie. And you're no, Jillian, it wasn't. It wasn't at all.
Yeah.
So letting people think and feel and assume whatever they want, giving yourself the gift of being misunderstood.
I love that. And, when I first heard you talk about boundaries, and we've had conversations about it before, it was almost like I was thinking like erecting a fence, like put this big wall up or something, as if kind of like you were saying, the myth that like you can try to act like you don't care. Of course you care. But what I'm hearing is it's almost like more philosophical in that, like stoicism. I study a lot of stoicism. Like you have to recognize like what you can control, what you can't control. And if you think about it, like you taking me and saying, you should love this movie, Chad, you should really that's completely out of your control, my opinion, what I'm going to think about it. And you have a little bit of control over whether you can talk me into going to the movie and persuading me to do that. And that's such a healthy way to think about it. It's not natural for me, I know, to I want to please people. I want them to like this. I want them to like me. But ultimately, if you really think think about it, that is completely out of our control. And for us to put our emotional state of well-being in whether they like it or don't like it is, when you think about it that way, it makes total no sense to think about it that way. But that's what we do all the time. That's what I do all the time. You put your work out there, and whether somebody likes it online or responds to it is whether I'm happy or upset about it, right?
Yeah. And that kind of people pleasing, the other side of it is kind of a manipulation. If you think about it, because we're trying to manipulate what other people think and feel and assume about the thing we created. And I encourage people, like, that's none of your business. Like, your business is to create the thing. Their business is to manage their own internal world of how they think and feel and assume. But you're not responsible for that piece. And like you were talking about walls, I have a chapter of you create the thing, you create the rules. And that's very tactically, like, if you're making a thing, kind of, I live in Montana. I love gardening. Gardening, we have to have like big fences around our gardens because there's so many deer here. And it's kind of like your garden. Like, you have to build the fence around it with the rules you create, the rules for yourself, the rules for your company, for your brand, for your employees, of how you'll engage. And you have to be really clear about those. You have to know them for yourself. And you get to decide, like, what comes in to your garden and what stays out. But those should be very tactical, kind of practical rules that you create.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like you had one thing I circled in the book and said, this is great, is the clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And maybe you can unpack that a little bit, because I think that making that fence, and this could be, with your contractors, I'm thinking about that a lot. I've made the mistake of, when you hire contractors, being a little too vague about what my expectation is. And then I get all upset when they don't fulfill my expectation that I never clearly articulated in the first place. That's on me. Like, that has nothing my contractor should have done it perhaps, but I didn't ask them to do it. So maybe talk about that, how being unclear is on us. It's not necessarily on the other person who didn't fulfill our expectations.
Yeah. Sometimes we're filled with hope and assumptions. Hope that everyone has the exact same sensibilities as us. Hope that, like, everyone's going to kind of do things our way, and we won't have to be clear. We won't have to explain things. Because for most of us, there's this tiny bit of vulnerability in being really clear, because we don't want people to think that we're bossy or we're demanding or we're micromanaging. So it just feels safer to kind of lob something vague out there and, like, hope for the best. So clear is kind. It kind of flips that script, in that if you value what you're doing and if you value the relationships, the kindest thing you can do is to be really clear, about all those rules. You created the thing, you create the rules, especially managing a construction project. Like, this is your thing. You have to make the rules for it. Like, having that kind of extreme ownership of the things you create, but then going that step further and being very clear with everyone what those rules are, what those expectations are. Because to be unclear, it just leads to frustration and confusion on both people's part, to disappointment. And either you're going to experience it or they're going to experience it. or both of you. But in either case, that's not kindness. To let things devolve into kind of this frustrated mess, we're not doing anyone any favors. So kind of that clear is kind mantra is like, I have the rules. If I want to be kind, I should be really clear.
Yeah. And my own experience has been that it certainly is when you are clear, kind, but it is that reason, that vulnerability you feel up front for not being kind is that it takes some extra work to do that. You got to think about, you have to take time to think about like, what do I want? Like what is clear for me?
Yeah.
And then there's also sometimes at a minimum, just some extra time. Like you're talking to the contractor, you're talking to your team member, you're having to take extra time out of your schedule and theirs. So that's extra effort. And it also might make them a little uncomfortable in the short run, because you might be changing or suggesting that maybe there needs to be something done a little bit differently. And they might say, I don't like it that way. Like, I don't like the way you are asking me to do that. And there might be some conflict on some minor conflict on the front compared to what it could be later on. But I'm speaking personally here again, like those are the reasons I have not, there's a friction on the front end to being clear with a contractor, to being clear with a spouse, with your kids, whoever, because it's just easier to let it kind of go, we'll all be happy and move on. And then but it always like grows and blows up later when everybody's upset about it. So I think that's such it's just a habit. It's do you have any suggestions on the front end for, being more habitually clear? Because I think it is something that we all get habituated not to do.
Yeah, I think it goes back to you make the thing, you make the rules. It's taking the time to being really clear with yourself first. What are these rules? What are my expectations? What are my timeframes? What can I accept? What can I not accept? And then taking that to another person, because it's kind of laziness on both sides. Like, I don't really want to make the rules. I just hope everyone has the exact same sensibilities I do. And I don't really want to clearly communicate them because I shouldn't have to. And there's that, sometimes we get stuck in that, well, I shouldn't have to because we're all adults. I worked at a job where we didn't have a dress code. And the owner's rationale was, you're all grown adults. You should just be able to figure this out. But we had this unpaid meeting every Saturday morning, which I hated. But at that meeting, people would seriously criticize each other for how they dressed. And it devolved quickly into well, you look like a whore. Well, you look like a punk. You look like a homeless person. I mean, it was awful. And I kept saying to him, dude, you just need to come up with a dress code because this isn't healthy and this isn't productive. And he always came back to, well, I shouldn't have to. You guys should be grown adults. And I'm like, you make the thing, you make the rules. This is your business. You're the manager. Sorry, buddy. This is in your purview of creating rules. You have to have the ownership of it and care enough to be clear about those rules. And you talked about kind of that friction on the front end. I talk about in the book, if you use clear as kind, it helps you find a path forward. Because maybe you and your contractor do disagree about something. He's like, well, that's not going to work. That's not the right way to do it. It's better to have that conversation early so that you can find a path forward, so you can figure it out. My dad worked in construction for a lot of years, and it's funny on the other side, the things that owners will ask them to do. They're like, yeah, that's illegal. That's against code. That's not going to work, or that doesn't work for this area. And they're like, do it anyways. And you're like, well, you're not going to pass inspection, but whatever.
But if nothing else, that's a dialogue, right? I mean, so none of us are perfect. So we make rules that aren't always correct. We're not perfect people, but it creates that dialogue on the front end rather than on the back end. Because once your father has built the thing, he said, I told you it wasn't right, and now you're like, well, what, you should have pushed back, if you tell them up front though, then your dad, the expert in that situation could say, you know what, you really don't want to do it this way. Let's do it this way. And then you mark out your one rule that said you wanted to do that, and you change. And this is a scope of work. That's what you make when you do a building project. And so it's you don't have to be perfect, but you do. you do have that conversation on the front end before the thing is in place is such a big deal, because it's going to a little minor emotional turbulence to avoid like a major emotional turbulence and problems down the road. It's a repeated pattern that we can all find.
Yeah. Yeah. It creates a path forward, just clear as kind. And you come up with better solutions. You come up with better outcomes, which is what we all want.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. So there are these people out there in the world that we're going to have to work through. Some of them are going to be complete haters. Some of them are going to be our contractors, our friends who we just need to deal with in a way that's healthy and being clear as kind. I want to transition to the second part of the book, where it's more about your own internal critic, which, as you said up front, like if we didn't have this internal critic, the external critics probably wouldn't be an issue. You're not going to be upset when people tell you should be you're too tall. Like that's not, your internal critic isn't sensitive to that. But there's other things you are probably very sensitive to. And so I want to go to the idea that I think we've all felt at some time or another, especially when we're putting ourselves out there, is this idea of an imposter syndrome, where who are you to be doing this entrepreneurial thing? Like, who are you to be, building this business, making these offers, borrowing $200,000 to buy a house? You're going to fail. Like, maybe just help me unpack, or us unpack what that's all about, like and why we feel that.
Yeah, I feel like imposter syndrome kind of crops up at one of three junctures. One, it's when we're outside our comfort zone, like we're growing and we're trying and we're like in new spaces, learning new things. The second point is when we really care, when it matters, like we're invested in this outcome. And the third one, we're shipping the work out into the world. We're kind of showing up as a professional, saying this is who we are, and we're doing the thing. And oftentimes it might be all three of those at once. And it kind of triggers this imposter syndrome. And I think the cure isn't to not feel that feeling. And it's definitely not to like get outside your comfort zone, care, and ship the work. Like those are three essential ingredients to your continued success. But instead it's understanding that feeling and that sensation differently and creating a different story around it. It's kind of like if you had never gone to the gym, if you've never worked out and you know nothing about this, and you show up and you start sweating and you freak out. You're like, what is happening? There's liquid coming from my skin. Like I must be doing something horribly wrong. I shouldn't be here. This is obviously bad for my health. I'm going to leave and never return. Or you can say, oh, look, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Like I feel this slight discomfort. But I'm doing exactly what I should be doing to get where I want to go. So I think I can just hunker down here, and get, experience this discomfort for 30 minutes or an hour or a couple days, and then it'll pass.
Yeah, I like that idea that you're on the right path if you feel this emotion. It reminds me of, I always loved reading Joseph Campbell, who wrote the book, The Hero's Journey, and talks about how when you are going for the thing that is your correct journey, like your hero's journey, it always starts with facing things that are terrifying. And if you're on the comfortable path, if you're on the path that everything's easy, or you don't feel like you're out of place, or you don't feel a little bit of imposter syndrome, you're on the wrong path. That's not your path. Like this is like actually part of the path. And that's totally a flipping of the script, because like you said, when you walked into the gym and you're sweating, that feels wrong. A lot of us, when we start our entrepreneurial journey, we feel like, wait a minute, like me feeling uncomfortable like this, like I'm out of place, like I'm not good enough is wrong. Whereas what you're saying is like, most of us have felt that. That's pretty normal.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a good sign. Like you said, if you never experienced that, either you're not outside your comfort zone, you're not growing, you don't care, and you're not shipping the work, which is fine if you're a hobbyist. Like there's lots of things I do as a hobby. I love hand lettering. I love watercolor painting. I'm not outside my comfort zone. I don't really care. And I'm not shipping this work. Like it is just a hobby. So I've never experienced imposter syndrome in that area. Yeah. But if you're going out and you're doing the thing, you should experience it. Because the other thing it might be is just unearned confidence, where you're incredibly confident for no good reason. And those people generally crash and burn too, because they feel like they know everything. Therefore, they don't seek out new information.
So that reminded me of a story you told in the book, Jillian, where it was your first part of your podcast where you made 20 episodes and you were confident, you were happy with the result so far. And then you went and listened to some of your favorite podcasts that day. I think you were listening to Ira Glass or, This American Life, some of these just amazing, highly produced podcasts. And you broke down in tears and were like, this is, I'm quitting because this is horrible. Like, talk to me about that, because I think I've had a similar feeling. Maybe we all have when we've compared ourselves to like the expert. And here we are, we have good taste, but we haven't yet filled that gap of what an expert is yet.
Yeah, it's so difficult because you'll go into things because, like Ira Glass says, you have good taste. And especially in like flips and renovations, like you've seen the pictures, you know what good looks like. But if you're doing this for the first time, your skill doesn't match your taste. And it can be really discouraging. It can be really painful for people to like know what they want it to look like, and then yet not have that result. I have a lot of real estate investor friends, and they have this like goal of like, I want this many doors. And all their offers keep getting rejected. And it's just painful because like they're not making progress as quickly as they want to be. And there's that tension of you're in that middle space where your skill doesn't match your taste. The people who are successful are the people who can manage that discomfort, because there is that little bit of discomfort. After I recorded those 20 episodes, I heard this one that was just so brilliant and funny and smart. And the only thing worse than knowing like my work was kind of stilted and definitely did not measure up was that the only way I was going to get better was to keep producing this slightly stilted, disappointing work, because it's like dry stacking a stone wall. You know where you want the top of the wall to be. And each attempt is laying a 1-inch stone, a 2-inch stone. Every attempt falls short, but every attempt gets you a little bit closer to where you want to go. And it's tough. Like I was setting tile last weekend, and I've set this tile before, and it's tricky. And then once it was down, I was like, oh, it's not perfect. Like I can see where it didn't get it close enough. Like, and I thought I'll cover it with the grout. It'll be fine. And I grouted it, and I'm like, no, it's not right. But it's because I've only set this tile 3 times. I'm probably going to have to set it 6 or 7 more times, which hopefully my life does not involve setting this 6 or 7 more times, this particular type of tile. So it's kind of managing that discomfort of being in the middle.
Yeah. And it sounds like the remedy to that discomfort is actually practicing the thing, whether you're in spite of your imperfection, like in spite of your tile, you're not the perfect tiler, but at some point you got to do it. Otherwise you're not going to learn to do it. That's the irony of it.
Yeah.
And so I know a lot of people get caught in this. This is a good segue, because people get caught in this preparation trap, their analysis paralysis in real estate happens all the time, because it does matter to them, because they do feel it's important, because the stakes are really big, that this is going to cost a lot of money. The mistakes could be big, but also if I can make this work, this is going to change my life for the better. And so it's so important that they say, because it's so important, I'm going to prepare extra. I'm going to do even more studying, even more learning. You have a ratio you're talking about in the book that I found really helpful, just a practical application of how much you should spend time preparing and how much you should spend time doing.
Yeah. It's really easy to get stuck in the procrastination via preparation, where you're just preparing, but it's actually a form of procrastination. It's because you're scared and nervous to move forward. You're scared of the failure. You're scared of falling short. So I think it's important to mind your ratios. What percentage of time do you spend preparing versus what percentage of time are you actually doing the thing? And it's okay if for the first week or the first month or the first 3 months, it's like 90-10. When people go through your real estate, start school, they might spend the first 2 or 3 weeks just watching the videos and preparing, and that's fine. And then at some point, your percentage needs to start to shift, or it's like 80-20, 70-30. Like, you're still learning, you're still preparing, but you're actually out there like trying to make deals, trying to sign contracts, like putting in offers. You're doing a little bit of the work too. And we should always be learners. So, you might stop at like 10% of your time is preparing and learning and getting better. But eventually 90 or 80% of your time, you're doing the thing.
Yeah. So it flips, early on in your career, you have no way of figuring it out. So you start 90-10 preparation versus doing. But even then you're going out in the field. If you're taking real estate deal school, then you go out and you actually go look at houses. You actually go do the 100 house exercise that I always try to tell people to do. Go out and just, the risks are really low there. You're not making an offer yet. You just go out and you look at the house, you study it, but you're moving. You're not sitting behind your computer studying. You're actually doing the thing in your market. And that is such a critical step. And it reminds me of something that another very helpful tool in the book was, instead of going big and to say, I'm going to go big or go home, which I talk about a lot of my podcasts, like go small or go home, like do the opposite of that. But you even bring it to a more practical state to say, you ought to like just test, like don't, you're a new investor, you're a new, whatever you're doing. Don't feel like you have to like build the entire castle right now. Just put that one stone on the wall that you compared earlier. So maybe you could talk about that, because this is a trademark for you, I know, is that you need to test and scale something versus just going all out. What does that mean for us to help us in this context?
Yeah, the trouble with kind of go big or go home is that you're not open to kind of learning and feedback, because you're making one grand gesture. So you have to have everything figured out before you start, and then you have to hope all of that information is correct. And the reality is, we learn through iteration. We learn through experiments. We learn on the journey. And so in test and scale, I define a test as something you can do in 1 to 4 hours. So if you think about your real estate journey, what's one step, one action step, one conversation, one thing that you could take action on that takes between 1 and 4 hours? Just a little bite-sized thing. And in each of those tests, you'll learn something. You'll figure something out. You'll grow a tiny bit. You'll have a helpful conversation. And then you take all of that information and that growth and you pivot slightly and you do one more test that takes 1 to 4 hours. And it is in that process of just doing the thing that you not only gain momentum, but you get the learning and the growth that you need to scale things up, to go a little bit bigger each time. But kind of like the procrastination via preparation, like you can't figure it all out sitting on your couch in your living room. Like you will never get to the end. And you even look at companies like Facebook or Ford Motor Company. What they're creating now is not what they started with. There was lots of iterations that happened, lots of growth and change that happened while they were going. They didn't plan this whole master plan and then launch Meta or whatever it's called now. It's a lot of iterations.
Yeah, and that's actually built into the software world. I mean, they have pilot programs. They have, beta versions of software that are secret and only, 500 people know about. So it's not like we're the only ones doing this. This sort of, it's like creating a beta version of yourself, like of your work, your job, your real estate business. Just, I'm in beta, like put a sticker on your computer saying I'm still in beta mode. That's all good, right? I'm going to make mistakes. There's going to be failures. There's going to be shortcomings, and I'm going to do that for the next 1 to 4 hours. That's what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to debrief after that. I'm going to assess how it went and what the mistakes were. And then I'm going to do another 1 to 4 hours. And those little strings of 1 to 4 hour tests eventually become this tapestry, right? This work of art, this business that you're trying to build.
Yeah. And there's less, I like the tacticalness of 1 to 4 hours because there's less excuses. Because it's hard for someone to say, I really want to grow in this area, but I don't have an hour this week. There's no way I could make an hour happen. you probably have 1 hour. And so it kind of gets you out of that preparation mode and into the doing mode, because it removes some of those like logical excuses.
Yeah, if you can get the momentum going, then that chatter in your head, that inner critic, doesn't have as much room to talk because you're busy. Yeah. You're too busy just doing the thing. Well, so we've talked about preparation versus the ratio of doing it, and one of the other big ideas from the book was that at some point, we have to get out there, even in spite of our potential failures. We've just got to get in the habit of doing it. And you talked about maybe creating some of these 1 to 4 hour windows, these action steps you talked about, and turning those into the main thing you focus on, the process, the actions. So maybe could you help us out? Because I think a lot of the entrepreneurial world is we're aspiring to these goals. I want to have a certain number of properties. I want to have a certain amount of income. I want to build wealth. I want to have financial independence. When in reality, like there's a different mechanism to actually get to those things. So what is that mechanism that we can focus on more consistently?
Yeah, it's so easy to get stuck on the outcomes that we want instead of developing the practice of just engaging in the process. And if we're going to kind of anchor our identity anywhere, I would anchor it in the process, because I'm sure, like those are the people that are successful, are the ones that just do the process every day, every week, every month. Like they engage in the process, like the outcomes eventually happen. But it's so easy to kind of fantasize about the outcomes. I had a coworker once around the same time. I'm buying houses, I'm renovating, I'm doing the thing. It's very imperfect. It's very messy, very hard. She is taking classes on how to be a real estate investor and like going to like conferences. And she signed up for like this $20,000 like mastermind kind of thing. And like, she hasn't put in a single offer. Mm-hmm. And it's like 6 months, it's a year. I'm on like house 3. And I'm just like, I think you just need to kind of get started. Like, no, more. I'm just, she had this ideal of like what the perfect offer is and what the perfect percentage is and the perfect like house, but not actually doing the process, not finding deals, not putting in offers. Instead, just like romanticizing, like I'll have like this much like, appreciation when I sign the paperwork because I'm going to find like these perfect deals. And I know you talk about this, like sometimes the perfect deal is like the one you get, like the good enough deal that you start with. And then the next deal's a little bit better. The next deal's a little bit better than that. So it's kind of falling in love with the process instead of just those idealized outcomes.
Yeah, I find this is such a rewarding idea when you implement it, because I almost think about it like a craftsperson. Yeah, I'm not a craftsperson myself. Like I'm so unskilled with my hands, but I admire people who are like woodworkers and they just love the craft. I mean, they just love the smell of the wood when they're doing it. They just love the doing. And I feel like that's sort of the secret sauce of being a real estate investor, a podcaster, whatever we're choosing to do. If we don't love the process, if we're at least not, even if we don't love it, like if we're not intrigued by it, if we're not like drawn to it, and even though it's painful and uncomfortable sometimes, but we're like, with exercise, for example, like nobody loves like the pain of like, it's not just, but there is a satisfaction in being a person who exercises, who has that identity that what I do is I get up in the morning and I run, or I work out, or I do yoga. So it's like, no matter what we're talking about, it's that love of the process that seems to be that's the common theme I've seen with so many people who are effective with their craft. They're a craftsperson. They're not a person who, looks at their finished works of art and says, look how great this is. They're the person who loves like the doing of it itself. Mm-hmm. So that's, those are some ideas. There's obviously a lot more that I want to talk about. And there's actually one I missed that I knew we had to get to, because this was a big one for me too. We didn't talk about family and how sometimes your family is your biggest fan, but at the same time, they can be some of your impediments because you're trying to, just like your inner critic, they're your most vulnerable spot. So can we circle back around to that? Because I do think we're going to all kind of have to deal with the family when we're trying to do this thing that's important to us.
Yeah, I was hoping we would get to this one because it's something that like every single person struggles with. And it doesn't matter what your friends and family circle looks like. I was recently at a conference and I spoke and I said, okay, who in the room, all of your friends and family totally understand what you're doing. They get it. They're super supportive. They know how to support you. Like, raise your hand. And there was one person in the whole crowd who raised their hand. So learning how to navigate these relationships is really important. And a few things that I find helpful. One, is the idea like you were given a very specific vision for your life, for real estate investing, for like the trajectory. No one else was given the vision for your life that you were given. And it's okay if they don't understand. Like, it's not their vision to understand. They have their own life vision that they have to understand. Like, we each have enough work just figuring out our own life vision to then like try to figure out 20 other people's. So kind of like in the external critic, like giving yourself the gift of being misunderstood. That it's okay if your family doesn't understand. It's okay if your friends don't understand. It's okay if they don't get it. And the other element is not everyone has to be everything to you. When we bought our very first property, it was in sorry shape. And after we closed, I kind of walked my family through and I showed them like, hey, this is our new house. And like, we were going to move into it and gut it and renovate it and all that. And my grandma said, oh, honey, you're not going to make my grandson live here, are you? I was like, yeah, we are. We'll make it better. But it's okay. Like, she doesn't have to be my real estate investing guru. She doesn't have to be the super knowledgeable one about live-in flips or home renovations. Like, I can have other people in my life who fulfill that role and who fulfill that person. And their vision is at least, it kind of overlaps mine. Like, we have something in common, which is why I think your courses are so important. Is like, you need to know other real estate investors. I talk about in the book, everyone who's successful knows someone else who's successful in the exact same way they're successful. Like, you'll never meet like an amazing guitar player who's like, yeah, I've never met any other musicians. I've never come across any. Or like a painter who's like, I don't know any other painters. I've been doing this 40 years, never met one. Like, if you're successful, you know other people who are successful in exactly the same way. And so if you want to invest in real estate, you need to know other real estate investors so that your friends and family don't have to fulfill that role for you. You can find other common bridges, I do a lot of internet kind of business stuff. My mom, it's not her thing. She is not the person I'm going to go to for like email marketing and funnels and conversion rates. Like, when I put my blog on the internet, like 3 years later, this was so sweet. I was mentioning something about my website and she goes, wait, you have a website? Like on the internet? And I was like, Mom, I've told you I have this blog. And she was like, well, I don't know where blogs go. I don't know where you put them. It's on the internet. So like, her and our relationship doesn't have to be based on this. Like, it can be about cooking and food and family. And like, we can have other things in common that bring us together. And it kind of lets them off the hook for being your support system for this new thing.
Yeah, that's so helpful. It's like you have these different, again, boundaries in your life, these different groups of people. Mm-hmm. Your real estate investing friend isn't going to necessarily be the one, giving you the family advice and and vice versa. And I found family in particular, I think so many people I talk to and in my own experience too, your family, even a caring family member. So this is, sometimes we have the critical family member who the person at Thanksgiving dinner who knows it all. And they're kind of fit in the troll category than they do the supporter. But your most supportive family members, if you don't create that boundary that you're talking about of saying, you know what, they're not my real estate investing advisor. They're just, that's not their knowledge. Because they care about you so much, their misguided advice could seem even more meaningful, and it can derail you even more. They're just like your inner critic. They seem like, they don't want you to be hurt. They don't want you to fail. They don't want you, and they're scared for you. And yet you've made this choice to step outside of your comfort zone. You've made this choice to test things and scale them, and all these things you've been doing behind the scenes. They don't see those and they don't feel those. And so that's the difficult separation there of like saying, you know what, they care about me. I know they said that because they care about me, but that's not necessarily the right advice for me in this sphere of my life. That's a important separation there, but not always something that we can do easily.
There's a lot of dynamics that are happening with family and friends. And in this chapter, I kind of try to break through like some of these dynamics that might be at play. Like one, them being concerned for you is totally an issue that comes up. Another one, which can be confusing on the outside, is the reality that you're changing and you're growing and you're moving in a different direction. They didn't opt into this change. Like they didn't get a vote. Like not everyone decided, hey, we really want Jillian to change and be very different. And your changing can create a lot of insecurity and fear and anger, especially if you're moving away from kind of who they self-identify as. Maybe they've always worked a corporate job and now you're doing this real estate investing, or they've always kind of been low income and you're trying to like own 100 doors, and that moving apart can trigger a lot of things in them, and it can come out as like criticism and negativity, and in reality, the words they don't have is just that I'm scared. I'm scared that you're changing. I'm scared that we won't have as much in common. I'm scared that you might be judging me or that you might think less of me. I'm scared that you don't value the life that I have, which is why you're trying to do something different. And I'm worried that we're growing apart. But they don't have maybe the words to say that or the honesty to say that. So instead, they're just critical. And you'll see this no matter what big change people make in their lives. Like if you lose 100 pounds, there will be people in your life who are just critical and negative. But it's that underlying fear of you're becoming different. And I'm not sure if we're going to have anything in common.
I think you hit something profound there. I think I'm feeling it, and let everybody else just soak that in. Jillian, this has been so helpful, and I just want to thank you again. This is one of those books, I'm just going to tell everybody that, you have these external books that help you figure out how to fix a house or how to find a deal, and those are important. This is one of those books you need to have on your shelf, because the internal work we do as an entrepreneur, as an investor, is just as important or more important than some of those external skills. And I just think you did an amazing job, Jillian. Hope everybody gets the book. Can you let us, I'm going to put links in the show notes, but let everybody know where they can stay in touch with you, follow up on the book, and I know they'll want to follow what you're doing after this interview as well.
Yeah, JillianJohnsrud.com is kind of, and I'm Jillian Johnsrud on Twitter and Instagram. And probably outside of the book, probably the most helpful thing, if you go /content, I have a little free mini course, especially if you're promoting your real estate, whether the flips or buying or selling online, on how to kind of like map out your customer journey on kind of the business side of it. So that might be helpful.
Yeah. All right. I'll put that link in the show notes, links to your website. And Jillian, just thank you again. This has been a lot of fun talking and catching up. Let's do it again. Don't wait. So we'll have to not wait as long next time. But I enjoyed talking. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much.
All right. If you'd like more details on today's guest or the resources that we discussed, you can find a link to the show notes for today's episode in the podcast description in your podcast player or in the video description on YouTube. If you're new here, please consider hitting that subscription button in your favorite podcast player or YouTube so you'll be notified each Monday morning with my newest episode. Everything I've shared with you in this episode has been for general education purposes. I've not considered your specific situation or risks. Before buying your own investments, be sure to consult a financial, real estate, and/or a legal professional. Until next time, I'm Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach. I'm your host for the Real Estate and Financial Independence podcast, which is all about helping you invest in real estate, achieve financial independence, and do more of what matters. See you next time.